never in human history, as a nation, showed such levels of detailed sadism, exposed on nightly television shows in full light and gotten away with it.
Welcome back to The Tea. I'm your host, Myriam. 6 months on from the so-called ceasefire in Gaza, while headlines have moved on, Israel's killing has continued. We've entered the slow genocide phase, a campaign not only of direct violence, but of deprivation. Right now, more than 18,500 patients, including 4,000 children, urgently need medical evacuation. Only a fraction have been approved, and of those, just around 8% have actually been allowed to leave. The rest wait, deteriorate, or die. These engineered conditions are pushing Gaza's healthcare system, or what remains of it, to the brink. Every major hospital has been either destroyed, besieged, or rendered non-functional at least once. This is not a system collapsing under pressure, it's being systematically dismantled. Our guest today argues that this is not incidental, but deliberate, part of a broader strategy to make Gaza unlivable. In testimony at the Gaza Tribunal last year, he described the destruction of healthcare as a deliberate dismantling of the means to survive, rather than accidental collateral damage. He is an award-winning Norwegian doctor, professor emeritus, and a long-standing advocate for Palestinian liberation. For over 4 decades, he's returned time and time again to the front lines of crisis, from the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in 1981 through the intifadas, the wars on Lebanon, and every major assault on Gaza over the past 15 years. In 2014, after treating patients during Israel's assault, he was banned from returning, a ban he's described as a badge of honor. A recipient of multiple humanitarian and press awards, including recognition from the United Nations and the Norwegian Medical Association, he is the author of Night in Gaza, a searing account not just of war, but of its human cost. Today, he's one of the leading medical voices documenting the destruction of Gaza's healthcare system and asking what it means when medicine itself becomes a target. Dr. Mads Gilbert, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. Many people will know you from your work in Palestine, but you've been working on the cutting edge of emergency medicine at home in Norway, as well as abroad, for many, many years. What took you from your home in Oslo to these various locations? What was the drive?
You know, Myriam, we're living in an extremely affluent country, Norway. We're stinking rich, we're obnoxiously spoiled, and we live very safe, very good life. The kind of life that everyone should be enjoying. We have food, water, security, work, schools, everything, an organized society. And being in that situation, there is a duty for us to share. It's a little bit sort of growing in my mouth when I say it, but I think that coming from our colonial past, it's repay time. And I think we need to share, not first of all going to the global south to do things, but to share our knowledge. Because knowledge is the most important capital for people to build their society. So, long introduction to the answer, it's my duty to share. So then we should go where the less fortunate people are having the most significant potential to improve healthcare. We are already at the top of the curve. But all those people who have been denied access to that modern medicine and with all our achievements should be our focus. And then we need to go there to share, to understand their needs, to understand their systems, respect it, and then work alongside with them, shoulder to shoulder. Not in the old Orientalist colonial way that we come there and are going to tell them what to do, but in a respectful, listening and learning way.
When we met recently, you told me the story of a woman who you brought back to life after she'd been dead for 3 hours. And I just wanted you to share that story just briefly, because people will know your Palestine advocacy, but they may not know what incredible cutting-edge work you're involved in outside of that too.
It was a young medical resident at one of the local hospitals in northern Norway. I live in the Arctic, very remote, very cold, very scattered population, long distances. It's 4.7 times bigger than Denmark, my region. So it's a little bit like Alaska or northern Canada. She fell while skiing under the ice, was trapped with her two friends, desperately trying to get her up, also medical residents. And they couldn't get her up because she was in this hole in the ice where the water, the running water, the ice-cold running water was almost drowning her. So after half an hour, she stopped fighting and she was dead. And then help came, long story short. The search and rescue helicopter came. We have a very good search and rescue system in Norway. And they managed to hatch a hole in the ice, get her up, and they started immediately CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, the two doctors, her friends. Then the helicopter came, winched her up, continued the CPR all the way north to our university hospital, where we have a long-standing interest in research on and experience with fatal accidental hypothermia, meaning people getting so cold that their hearts are stopping or they stop breathing. Of course, because we live in the Arctic and we have a long coast with fishermen and we have the Sami population, reindeer herders and so on. So she came into our hospital, landed on the platform. Then she had been without any signs of life for 3 hours. She looked extremely dead. We knew nothing more about her than this accident had happened. And we followed our routine, took her to the pump room, the cardiothoracic operating room, where we do open heart surgery, connected her to the bypass machine, and started warming her blood. And the amazing thing about this situation was that her body temperature was at 13.7 centigrades.
Most humans are 37?
Yeah. 37 is our normal, and we'd like to be between 34 and 38, 39, 40. That's the optimum of body temperature. So 13.7 is, way beyond possibility of life. But the interesting thing about hypothermia is that it is a double-edged sword. It can stop your biological functions like the heart and the other organs. But at the same time, for every centigrade we drop in temperature, we need 10% less oxygen. So when you have dropped 10 from 37 to 27, there is basically no need for oxygen. So if the heart stops, you should still have a hope. So we started warming her blood, and suddenly the heart started beating again. It was a very moving moment. Her pupils contracted. We had, of course, put on the tube. She was on a ventilator. It was a very long, 1 year long, extremely complicated postoperative intensive care with all these different teams doing the best. And we got to know that she was a medical student, and she survived. And she herself and her family and her friends were the big team that really had the life will, the living energy to survive. And again, a long story short, we published a paper in The Lancet, and it has been for many, many years the world record in hypothermia resuscitation, accidental hypothermia. She became a doctor, a specialist. She's a radiologist, very clever, very active. She's back to sporting, she's skiing, she's bicycling, she's kiting, and she did her PhD dissertation 4 years ago.
Unbelievable story, thank you.
And this is what we should take from that story. We can move the borders. We can push the limits if we do it for the benefit of man, woman, children. One life is worth the whole world. And this is the stark, horrible contrast to Gaza, where people are denied even the most basic healthcare and right to live. They're even denied an ambulance helicopter or a protected ambulance. And this happens as the West, as Europe, are just sitting there idle and saying, oh, it's so bad, doing nothing to stop it.
Well, I really want to get into the current situation in Gaza in just a minute. But before we do, you obviously grew up in Oslo and you were an experienced doctor when the first Oslo Accords were signed in 1993. At the time, they were seen as historic because they represented the first mutual recognition between the PLO and Israel as a pathway to statehood, at least on paper. Looking back now, do you think Oslo was ever a genuine path to peace?
No, it was ever a trap from the Zionist movement. It was a trap to quell, to stop, and to kill the Palestinian resistance, in particular the armed resistance. They wanted to get an end to Fatah and PLO and to lure Abu Ammar Yasser Arafat into this trap. They never negotiated in goodwill. I don't think they ever had the intention to fulfill the obligations, which they have never done. And the Oslo Accord came to be very quickly an enormously dangerous trap for the Palestinians. And it still is. Look at the West Bank. And still there is a myth that Norway played this significant role and was a peace broker and blah, 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 blah. And it turns out that one of the most bragging personalities in the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Rød Larsen, has now been uncovered as one of Epstein's closest allies in his web spinning. So this is very much a scandal being uncovered these days. We just had a big seminar, an open conversation in Oslo, attended by 400 people, where we discussed it with senior Israeli and Palestinian voices, Mustafa Barghouti and Avi Shleim. And it is obvious. I mean, when I go to Gaza, and most of my friends are in Gaza. In Gaza, Oslo is a swear word. Really, for Palestinians, Oslo is a very bad word and a very bad expression. So we have started the Oslo Solidarity in order to retake the name of Oslo as a brand for true solidarity and a reliable support for the Palestinian liberation. And I'd like to make that point immediately, that I'm a peaceful man, I'm a medical doctor, but I support the occupied people's right to resist occupation, which is anchored in international law, also with arms. I don't support any attacks on civilians or breaches of international law, but an occupied people has the right to fight the occupier also with arms, within the limits of the international law, just as we support in Ukraine. And this is one of today's most horrible double standards. It's how Europe and the West and the US are supporting the Ukrainian just struggle against the Russian occupation, whereas they are, on the other hand, supporting the Israeli occupation of Palestine. This is not a difficult conflict. Palestine, West Bank and Gaza is not a difficult conflict. You cannot hide behind that. You cannot become an intellectually lazy person because you say, oh, it's so difficult. It is a difficult illegal occupation.
You mentioned Mr. Larsen, the Norwegian diplomat, who played a key role in the Oslo process. His name came up in the Epstein files, which showed that Epstein had actually loaned him $130,000 in 2013. And in Epstein's will, he left $5 million to each of Larsen's two children, totaling $10 million. There's also evidence he had multiple meetings and private visits to various Epstein's residences. What do you think the files and their revelations tell us about what the goal of Oslo actually was versus what we were sold it ought to be?
That's a key question, Myriam, but it's hard to answer it because the same guy, Terje Rød Larsen, he stole the critical parts of the documentation from the Oslo proceedings. They have been gone for 30 years. And one particular Norwegian historian, a Professor Hilde Henriksen Våge, has been nagging about this, has been showing in her research that there is a glitch in the continuity of documentation of the Oslo Accord. And that glitch was the part of the paperwork and the documents that he took away. And it has recently been found in his basement in Oslo and taken by, of course, the police and the archive authorities in Norway. And this particular historian, Hilde Henriksen Våge, she claimed already just after the Oslo Accord that these documents were missing. And she asked the then Minister of Foreign Affairs, our current Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, to investigate it. Where are the documents? And he refused. So there is a lot of revelations, of embarrassment, of hideouts that are coming to out in the clear air now. And we cannot still say what is the final story about the Oslo Accord. And in particular, the role that Norway played as a go-between between the US, the Israelis, and the Palestinians. So that remains to be seen. I think, and I think it's a valid assumption that Norway was part of the trap and was part of this luring of the Palestinians into that trap. And this, Mr. Rød Larsen's wife, Mona Juul, has both of these people, he, Rød Larsen, his wife, Mona Juul, are both under criminal investigation now for corruption. And she actually was sacked from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or rather they terminated her contract. She was appointed as the Norwegian UN ambassador during the period when Norway had the chair of the Security Council, despite the fact that her husband had already been uncovered and had lost his job in New York. So there is a web of things there. I think that Epstein also played an important role, but it remains to be seen to what extent. But my question is always, if Epstein had not been a pedophile, had his networking been okay then? And my conclusion is no, not at all, because it's just one of all these power networks behind the scene between people of power, of money, of influence that are avoiding democratic rules in their ruling of the world. I'm not a conspiracy thinker at all, but I think the Epstein files and these networks are just one of many similar power networks that are actually extremely dangerous because they are removed from the daylight and they are removed from democratic control, and we don't know about them.
Absolutely. And they're exactly the sorts of things that we're told don't exist. And yet once in a while we discover things that indicate that not only do they exist, but they have significant impacts on major world decisions and events and, you know, on our governments, really. Let me now ask you about Gaza, because Gaza has slipped out of the headlines. But the reality is that not much has changed on the ground over the last 6 months since the so-called ceasefire began. Hundreds of Palestinians still killed, thousands injured, and Israel has reportedly violated the ceasefire over 2,400 times. For people who haven't perhaps been following it that closely or perhaps haven't had access to information, can you paint us a picture of what the situation is in Gaza today?
Yes, and let me base that on the latest UN report. It's called the Impact Snapshot. Gaza Strip is from UNRWA, comes once a week, and it has all the numbers and all the reality on the ground on one A4 page. All the power people of the world has this. They have it. They read it, they know it, so the realities are not hidden. And even if they try to push Gaza into the cloud or the smokescreen behind, be it Iran or Lebanon, the realities on the ground, as you say, are horrific. And I think the most important thing is to understand that this is, in a way, a two-phased or three-phased genocide and ethnic cleansing. We could talk about the West Bank. That is a special case. But Gaza, as I know it for the last 25 years, has been under a constant, immense pressure, and in particular from the election in 2006-07, when the siege started. So Gaza has been under siege not for 4 years, but for 20 years. And it has been gruesome, because it has been affected the most important preconditions for life. And what are the preconditions for life? Is it a doctor? No. Is it a hospital? No. Is it a helicopter? No. It's water, it's food, it's human security, it's a place to live with your family, it's a work to give you income, and it is education. And then on the bottom of the list comes healthcare. And you cannot achieve public health if you don't have the first preconditions in place. And that's precisely why the Israelis, who are scientifically very, very savvy. They have a large number of Nobel Prize winners, and they know all of this. That's why they attack, in my opinion, the water, the food supply, and the human security, to drain the people of Palestine, of Gaza, of their life energy. And the most dramatic illustration of that is a recent publication from The Lancet showing that life expectancy in Gaza, which, for example, in Norway, life expectancy, I believe now, has passed 86 years. for men and women because we have all these preconditions. We can actually live until we're 90, 95 in a good society. In Gaza, the life expectancy before the 7th of October was 74.5 years, WHO numbers. It was 9 years shorter already than in Israel. So there was already a gap of life expectancy because of the medical apartheid and the living conditions. But it was close to 75. During the first 16 months since the 7th of October, life expectancy in Gaza has dropped from 75 to 35 years. That has never ever been recorded in medical history. And this is science. So what they have done through the combined effect of the bombing and the crude killing, the denial of healthcare, people bleeding to death because they cannot stop the bleeding, or people dying from infections or complications to the primary injury from the bombing, and then the people dying from prematurely from common diseases, pneumonia, myocardial infarction, stroke, diabetes, whatever, pregnancies, which will need some support during the disease to survive. And then the lack of water, food, and protection. So combine all these effects and you get the end result. That is this enormous drop in life expectancy. So if you're born in Gaza today, your father or your grandfather might have expected to live for 75 years. You will expect to live for 35. And this is all man-made with full deliberation, full planning, execution by the State of Israel. It is known, and it is going on as we speak. Because what continues in Gaza, and you rightly pointed to the many breaches of the ceasefire. I mean, if there is one state in the world who is not to be trusted, it's Israel. Just look at the record when it comes to ceasefires. Now in Iran, now in Lebanon, and then in Palestine and Gaza. What this ongoing ceasefire has meant for the Palestinians is, number one, they have lost half of the little territory they had.
So this is the so-called security line that the Israelis...
It's not security line, it's a reoccupation. They have moved the occupation so that the Palestinians now have 40% of the original 365 square kilometers they had.
And much of it on arable land, I gather.
Yes, and so this population of 2.1 million people that was already squeezed to a population density comparable to Singapore and Hong Kong are now doubled in density because they have half the territory that they are allowed to live in. And that reoccupation by itself is, of course, completely illegal. And add to that they are limiting the influx to a few trucks per day. They are stopping completely the evacuation of medical cases outside, as you said. And they are skyrocketing the prices because they have imposed a massive black market so that the people are drowning in poverty. And poverty is a very important marker of health, of course. So before this last period, poverty rates in Gaza before 7th of October was 75 to 80% of the population living under the standard poverty line. And now it's probably 100%. Unemployment rates are 95%. So in this environment, life will be lost, in particular for the young population. Now, I don't want to be the one who is only sort of painting the suffering picture, because in this situation, the Palestinian people in Gaza, they are not only surviving, but they are fighting back. And they are fighting back with dignity. And I talked to Gaza last night to one of my families, a young woman who the team in Shifa saved in 2009. When her family and her clan was bombed in Zaytoun, outskirts of Gaza. Her father was killed, her little brother was killed. She was buried in the rubble of the bombed warehouse for 3 days, and she survived with 2 Israeli shrapnels. She has, and I followed her, I always visit that family. She has grown up. She has done beautiful schoolwork, graduated and got married, 3 kids, and is now one of these multiply displaced families. And yesterday she texted me and she said, "How are you, Dr. Mads?" So their care, their humanity, their dignity is so striking. And she says, "We're doing okay, still in a tent. I wish we had more money. It's very hard to get food. It's very hard to get healthy food for my 3 children. But we will survive and we will not surrender." So despite the hardship, the Palestinian people, and not at least the medical people, find solutions. Continue to serve their people, continue to rebuild, restore, refurbish the destroyed hospital, primary healthcare clinics, continue to do research, continue to educate. Al-Azhar University, Islamic University, all bombed. They bombed all the 10 universities. Come on, who does that? I mean, one thing, bombing military installations, but bombing schools, universities, kindergartens, hospitals, ambulances. It's so inhuman that you think we're in the Middle Ages. And still, Israel gets away with it to protect itself. We have to realize that this is a 100% colonial, expansionist project. It has nothing to do with Israeli security. It has to do with Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, biblical land of Israel, which include southern parts of Lebanon. That's why they go all the way up to Litani, reoccupation. Syria, that's why they have expanded beyond the Golan Heights. Jordan, Egypt will be next because they have this vicious plan of expanding Israel to be the ruling power of West Asia. And it is a very dangerous situation.
You mentioned the kind of provision of daily care at different levels. Before October the 7th, UNRWA was the main point of reference for that, right? Providing education, medical care. I think there was even food distribution. We obviously know that Israel accused UNRWA of having staff members who were involved in the attacks on October the 7th. Are UNRWA still able to provide what they did? Because as my understanding was that around 70% of people in Gaza relied on UNRWA before October the 7th. So without it, I mean, what's the situation? Who's providing the education, the food, the structure that ensured that these basic needs are met?
If you're enjoying the show, why not join our Patreon community? The Tea is more than just a YouTube show. It's a space to foster meaningful change together at a time of violent turbulence and dizzying change. Becoming a Patreon means you get exclusive content and the chance to shape the show. So join us now, link in our bio.
We have to remember that 70% of the population in West Bank and Gaza are refugees. So the Palestinian population in Gaza is by majority refugees. And UNRWA was established in 1948, just after the Nakba, to take care of all these refugees that the division, the stealing of the land of Palestine caused. And it has been, for many years, the most long-standing refugee organization in the UN system. And that's a point to make, because this refugee problem has never been solved and will not be solved until the Palestinians can exercise their legal right to return to their homeland. And then we're talking about the refugees not in the West Bank and in Gaza, but also the diaspora, the refugees in Syria, in Lebanon, in Egypt, in Jordan, all over. They have the right to return, which of course is an abomination for the Zionists, because that will tilt the demography and the Palestinians will be in massive majority. So any democratic solution, a one-state solution with equal rights for all people, will give the Palestinians the majority. That's also important to bear in mind. But UNRWA as an organization is of course hampered by all these attacks and the limited funding which they now experience. But to my knowledge, they are still working. And don't forget that 90% of the staff in UNRWA has always been Palestinians, local Palestinians. But if you look at the latest humanitarian report from UN, it describes in detail how the support is not getting into Gaza. because the Israelis closed down the entries, be it in Khmer Shalom or in the north. And recently, they closed all influx of help to Gaza because it was a Jewish holiday. Who would do that? Use your religion to starve people? So UNRWA is incredibly important, but of course it should be obsolete because the Palestinian people are completely capable of managing their own lives, their own food basket, if they are let alone and allowed to do their daily work. The fisheries, the agriculture, the animal care, all of that has been destroyed in Gaza. They had a pretty reasonable level of self-supplying on the food side. The food basket was not that bad before the 7th of October. But now the Israelis have destroyed all agricultural land, almost all of it, the cattle, cows, goats, the fishing boats, the fisheries, the greenhouses, the land-based fish farming. You know, the Palestinians were very advanced in land-based fish farming in Gaza with no pollution to the sea. All of this has been bombed. And in this last report from last week, they point to how one factor is detrimental to the supply of water because now they are lacking lubricant for the generators that are powering the desalination plants in Gaza, which means that they cannot produce their own drinking water. And why should you deny people lubricant for generators? It's of course only to make life so difficult that they will be, in the thinking of the Zionists, the occupiers, forced to leave. So if we should demand one thing today, it is lift the siege, allow lubricant in, and of course food, water, and allow people to have free passage like everybody else has.
You mentioned Al-Shifa Hospital just a few moments ago, and you were one of a few Western trauma specialists that were there inside it during the intense early phase of 2008, 2009. One of the most, I'm going to use the word striking. There is no proper word for what I'm about to describe, but images that we saw over the last couple of years were the discovery of those mass graves, right? Outside of Al-Shifa and Nasser Hospital, around 500 bodies were reportedly found in those mass graves, many of them patients with catheters still in their arms, some of them children. Some seem to have been buried alive. For a lot, this was one of the clearest pieces of evidence of war crimes. Since then, has there been any accountability at all for those patients, for those healthcare workers, for the people who were buried alive in some cases?
The short answer is no. There has been absolutely no accountability. And I think the overruling headline of the massive moral, political, and historical problem with the situation of the State of Israel and the settler colonial project, and how it come to develop with such levels of cruelty and sadism, is impunity. So impunity is the key word to understand how this has expanded beyond any limits of evil and systematic draining of a people's right to live, to exist, to love, to have family, to study, and to have a future. It's impunity. Never has Israel been held accountable. I was in Beirut in 1982, my galvanizing experience.
In the Sabra, Shatila.
Yeah. I was there just until the week before the Sabra and Shatila, but during the summer of 82. We worked in a makeshift underground hospital together with Palestinian and Lebanese medics. It was hell on earth. They bombed hospitals, they bombed ambulances, they did a double strike all the time. First they bombed, then the rescuers came, then they bombed the rescuers. 1982. Sharon was the Minister of Defense. There was a committee, an investigation, and he was dismissed as Minister of Defense, but later became Prime Minister. And that was because of the Sabra and Shatila massacre. But this cruelty and this systematic, and they bombed water pipelines, they bombed sewage systems. We didn't have water, and they besieged West Beirut completely, medically, power, food, water, everything. And they bombed it night and day for the whole summer of 1982. until PLO was evacuated to Tunisia, and the rest is history. But from that on, I have been following the legal proceedings and the summing up of every one of the attacks. There has been, you can fill a shelf in your library with reports. The Goldstone report, 2009, the international report from 2014, and so on and so forth. Tons, binds of reporting, detailed, systematic, historical, scientific reporting. No consequences at all from the international community. No sanctions, no blockade, no limits to weapon export to Israel, no nothing. And this impunity has created a situation where I think that in the mentality of the Israeli governance, the Zionist governance, there is a limitless self-reliance that they are the untouchables. They will never be punished, they will never be stopped. And we see the historical consequences of that. You could call it laziness or cowardice attitude from the West because of the Holocaust complex. Europe sold their Holocaust guilt by giving away half of another people's country, more than half. To give away half of Palestine to a new Jewish state was the way Europe tried to get away with their responsibilities for the horrors of Holocaust.
Or in fact, continue its anti-Semitic tradition by actually getting rid of Jews.
That too, of course. And now, today, this collective void of taking charge and holding Israel responsible for all their crimes through all these years of ethnic cleansing and now genocide has created a new concentration camp, which is called Gaza, where 2.1 million people are living as we are speaking in a situation that many of them cannot survive. And it goes on as we are talking, and it is not being stopped, neither by your prime minister nor by my prime minister. Some are speaking up, but there are no systematic, efficient sanctions on Israel. This could be stopped in a short while, just by stopping weapons and money and power supply for Israel.
You've spoken obviously a lot about this idea of a systematic destruction of the healthcare system, but there's also been some allegations that there have been specific targeting of heads of departments and specialists in a systematic decapitation of specialisms. So we had Dr. Adnan Al-Brouch, the head of orthopedics at Al-Shifa Hospital, who was detained, tortured, and later died in custody, or I should say killed.
He was raped to death, probably.
Dr. Hossam Abu Safir, who is still missing, who's still in detention, director of Kamal Adwan Hospital. He's been detained since December 2024. He's reportedly being severely tortured and his health is declining. Dr. Marwan Al-Sultan, director of the Indonesian hospital, killed by an airstrike with his entire family in July 2025. There is a long list of, extremely specialized heads of departments who appear to all have been killed in various fashions, some detained, but some their actual apartment living quarters targeted. Do you believe there's evidence to suggest that Israel has been directly targeting these heads of departments? And what are the consequences of kind of getting elimination of these individuals?
Yes, I think this is part of the epistemicide, as it is called, the eradication of a people's knowledge, which consists of their research, their history, their libraries, their music, their literature, their research, their institutions, their universities and schools and hospitals and healthcare and engineering. All of that is being attacked by the Israelis, and I think there is good reason to suggest that they have been chasing down and killing systematically leaders, not only in the medical field, but in engineering and in academia. They bombed all 10 universities. They have bombed 70% of the public schools, the UN schools, and they have killed a massive amount of university teachers, scholars, and, as you say, senior medical doctors. At the time, I think we had a sum up saying that all those who normally would cover the home call in the departments, you have the on-call young doctors in the hospital, and then you have the home call, who is the senior who comes in when there is a special situation or a very difficult case. Most of that layer of medical knowledge has been eradicated systematically. And this is only one bit of how futile and how intrinsically sadist, I think, the way they deny people the preconditions for life, as we talked about. And I think it was Edward Said who said that never in human history has a people, has a nation showed such levels of detailed sadism in the nightly, exposed on nightly television shows in full light and gotten away with it.
Speaking of sadism, some Palestinian detainees from Gaza were recently released from Israeli prisons after reporting sexual violence. And this is all detailed in a really important report. I would urge everybody to go and look at it. It's the Euromed Human Rights Report. There's a lot of really disturbing details in that. Some of it are actually unbearable, frankly, direct descriptions of sexual assault and rape. But I want to read you this testimony from a 48-year-old man. And this is his words. During my interrogation, I was beaten, including on my testicles. When I answered questions with "I don't know," the interrogator pressed hard on my testicles and attempted to insert an object into my penis. I experienced intense pain. He added, on one occasion when he pressed on my testicles, I lost consciousness. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a hospital, handcuffed. I later learned that my testicles had been removed, leaving me in a severe psychological state. Is there evidence that Israel is using medical procedures as a form of torture?
There's been a long discussion about that with quite prominent British academic medical staff. There was a campaign trying to sack the head of the International Medical Association, which is the sort of the overruling body of medical doctors worldwide. He was a Zionist, and there is ample evidence that. Not only medical procedures are used as to torture people, but that medical doctors, Israeli medical doctors, take part in torture. We recently published a paper on that, and it's extremely disturbing that with of course some brave exceptions, but that the Israeli medical community has not been standing up and voicing protest and demanding an end, not only to the attacks on medical services and structures in Gaza and the West Bank, but to demand an end to the inhuman use of medicine and torture. It's been a silence that reaches far beyond the Israeli medical community. It reaches deep into Western medical communities and Western medical associations. There has been an academic boycott of knowledge coming from Palestine. I myself have experienced to be removed from the Lancet. Papers that had been accepted were in a few weeks removed because of pressure from the Zionist medical lobby. So I think it is time for the European and the Western medical societies to stand up and voice protest and demand sanctions, because at the end of the day we're all complicit. History will judge us, and Western, including UK, Norwegian, Scandinavian, and in particular American, US, and Canadian medical associations of all sorts, all specialties, have been kept shut. They have been muted. They have known what is going on, and they have chosen to shut up instead of demanding an end to it.
Unbelievable. There have been documented evidence that Israeli doctors have harvested Palestinian organs for over 3 decades now. More recently, Gaza's health ministry said that several bodies were returned by Israel in October 25 and early 26, missing vital organs like eyes, corneas, livers, and kidneys. This was the same for bodies that were returned in 2024, which Euromed Monitor also said was evidence of organ theft. How much do you know about this organ theft, trafficking? What are these organs being used for? Is this experimentation? Is this commercial profit? What is going on here? And how is this not a huge medical scandal? Forget medical, a huge scandal far beyond the medical community.
I don't know. I've heard these stories for many years. We heard them in the West Bank during the Intifadas. And they have been on and off exposed in the media. Yet I have not till now seen published evidence, neither forensic evidence nor scientific reports on the issue. So I will not comment on that. But yes, I've heard what you just quoted. And, sometimes you hope that it is not true. But as of now, I don't have the evidence or the scientific peer-reviewed papers to show that this is really going on. But there are many indications that this is the case. But we don't need that. I mean, the dangerous thing about these arguments is that we're discussing like the torture, which of course should be completely condemned and stopped. It's horrible. It's sadistic. It is unworthy of any cultivated nation, as they call them. But beneath that is the iceberg, which is the daily torturing of people in the West Bank, of people in Gaza, of Palestinian people in the camps in the diaspora, denying them human rights, denying them dignity, denying them the right to speak up, to move, to travel, to have a passport, to have a nation, to have a flag, to have a defense, to have a currency, to have what all of us take for granted. That is the big torture. That is the ongoing, systematic degrading of a whole people that refuses to behave like the animals they are treated like. Because if we should look somewhere in the world today to find role models of dignity, of resistance, and of culture, we should look at the Palestinian people. Just as we can see the Iranian people, how, with what sort of dignity they resist the recent attacks. The colonial parts of the world, the global north, unfortunately, still has a lot to learn from the people of the global south. That's the cradle of our culture. Africa, Asia, Persia. And yet they are treated as if they were human trash. And that has to end. So we have to decolonize our thinking, because we tend all the time to only talk about the suffering. And I am sick and tired of only talking about the suffering in Palestine, because what I see in Gaza is a brave people standing up, not yielding to any threat of extermination, but on the other hand, continuing their resistance, be it just to be stubborn in that tent, or being patient with your kids who are hungry, or starting a makeshift school because you're a teacher, or making some kindergarten fun with some music and dancing, or making kites, or picking up an AK-47 and resisting with arms. That is the dignity of the Palestinian people, and it is a miracle. It is a miracle that they still continue their lives in Gaza, given these 25 years, 20 years of siege, and these last 3.5 years of the most brutal ethnic cleansing and genocide that the world has seen in recent times.
Let's talk about solidarity for a minute. At the end of February, Israel tried to ban around 37 aid organizations operating in Gaza, but the decisions were later reversed for some of those NGOs. Israel has allowed a smaller group of organizations to continue operating. According to an investigation by the new Humanitarian, they were largely groups that either stayed publicly silent in order to maintain access, or were openly aligned with Israeli authorities. Can you just give us a sense, you yourself were banned at one point from entry. We've seen a number of doctors who've returned from Gaza speak out, who were also then banned. Can NGOs or even medical workers really stay outside of politics, be neutral when working somewhere like Gaza or Palestine more generally?
Let me quote a famous South African bishop, Desmond Tutu. He said, "If you are neutral in a situation of oppression and injustice, you are on the side of the oppressor. Either you are against oppression, or you support oppression with your neutrality. There is no neutral position, number one. Number two, There are few things on earth or in a society that is more political, and I'm not talking about party politics, but power politics, than medicine. Because medicine, at its bottom, is a question of distribution of power. It is a question of distribution of the right to water, food, security, work, home, education. And these provisions, these rights, will be evenly distributed in a fair society where the struggle for equality has been successful, like, for example, in the Scandinavian countries, where we have a social democratic model, and we have very quite small differences between the have-a-lot and the have-nothing people. So medicine is not being politicized by us who are doing solidarity medicine. It is at its fundament political. Look at the insurance system in the United States. And look at the medical situation in Gaza, where you cannot but understand that this is all about politics. So being neutral is not a valid situation. And by the way, my Hippocratic oath tells me to always protect my patient, to choose the side of the patient. If you come to me because, God forbid, some bad person have been beating you up, I will not choose to say, oh, maybe that person had a reason to beat you up, so we'll have to look at it from both sides. No, I would choose your side and say, of course, you should not have been beaten up. I'll do everything I can from my point of view as a doctor to support you, gather evidence, treat you, provide you with care, and so on. Now, that is in a one-to-one situation, a patient and a doctor, or a nurse, or a paramedic. But when the patient is a family, or a society, or a nation, you also have the choice to choose between staying on the side of the oppressor or staying on the side of the people. So for me, there is no neutrality. It's never. Of course, I'm always neutral when it comes to my individual relation. If I had an Israeli soldier coming to our team in Shifa, I would treat that person as an injured, just as I treated a Palestinian woman. But my choice lies before that. I go to Gaza and not to Israel, and that is a political choice. So we have to choose which side we are on. And when it comes to the NGOs in Gaza, this last report that I referred to, the snapshot, you know how many international personnel there is as of last week in Gaza?
How many?
72. It's nothing. And why is that? Because almost all the international NGOs have been wetted by the Israelis and disallowed to enter. So WHO has a mechanism where an emergency team can report to them in Egypt and say, we want to go to Gaza. All the name lists are sent to the Israelis, and they will look at every single name and give them a go or a no-go. And a large number of the NGOs that have been traditionally working in Gaza for many years are now denied access because they have been critical of the ongoing genocide. Simple as that. So the number of international emergency teams is very small. As of April 15th this year, there were 36 emergency medical teams in Gaza, and the majority, 310 of those participating in the teams, were Palestinians, and 72 were international staff. Myself, I went to Cairo immediately on the 8th of October, and I stayed in Cairo for 2.5 months trying to get in, and I still don't get in because I'm not allowed by the occupiers. And many of my friends and my colleagues who have been working very courageously in Gaza are now denied access. So this has been another part of the Israeli strangulation. They politicize medical support. They have weaponized food supply with this abhorrent organization they had. They have weaponized water. They have weaponized medical support, medical humanitarianism. All of this is now under the control of the Israelis in a way that will deny the Palestinian people basic human rights, which they are entitled to according to international law. So one of the most important victims of the attacks and the siege of Gaza is actually international law.
You've spoken openly about your support for the Palestinian people's right to armed resistance, which is enshrined in international law. What would you say to some people who will look at Gaza today and the suffering that's been caused by Israel's genocide and say that, the armed resistance actually causes more harm than good?
Well, I would kindly ask them to read history and look into the facts. The Palestinian people of Gaza have been trying all avenues. They have been patient. They have been negotiating. They tried the unarmed protest movement during the Great March of Return for 2 years. They went every Friday to the fence. Remember, there are no borders around Gaza. The only border is the border between Gaza and Egypt. All the other are preliminary lines on the map made by Israel. But they went to the fence. They protested, throwing stones. And I attended it, I was working there then. They shot and killed, and shot and killed, and shot and maimed, and shot in the hand, in the elbow, in the knees, in the ankles, to maim the young people protesting. Nothing came out of it. Nothing. And there was no international support for the Great March of Return.
So nonviolent protesting, not a peep of support from that?
No, nothing. And what they did was precisely to address the fence, the siege, the concentration camp condition. And they did it repeatedly in a very disciplined way. It was like a big folklore along the fence. Every Friday it was food, restaurants, mobile, it was music, it was dancing, it was, of course, appeals and protests and everything. Like a big protest festival. And nothing came out of it. And they tried negotiations, the Oslo Accord. They've tried the UN. They've tried every avenue. So they had a choice at the end, surrender or resist. We were occupied in Norway for 400 years by the Danish, then for 70 years by the Swedish. And then the German came in 1940 and occupied us for 5 years. And we waged the armed resistance, People's War, and we threw them out.
We did the same in France against the Germans,
Exactly.
Some of us at least, yeah.
And those resistance fighters in Norway are our heroes, and the German occupiers call them terrorists.
Same in France.
So one man's liberator is the other's terrorist. And I think we need to recalibrate our language. Palestine is defending itself. Israel is attacking, right? And the Palestinians have the right to choose how they will organize their resistance. But as long as they are occupied and continue to be occupied, we have to support their choice of resistance, always within the limits of international law. If any Palestinian armed faction is violating international law, of course they should be investigated and punished. But the massive criminal, the terrorist, is the State of Israel. So I would answer to anyone who says it is because of the armed resistance. I would say, with all due respect, that's bullshit. And hadn't the Palestinian people resisted, they would have been eradicated. And there would be no Palestine, neither today nor in the future. And that is the existential threat for any small nation, and Norway is a small nation. If Israel and the US succeed in the genocide and the epistemicide, Palestine will be another anecdote 50 years ahead. And there will be some small, like with the native people of North America. Just some very symbolic things left and some reservations. But the third nations, will be eradicated. And if they succeed in that, who is next? Which small nation is next? Is it Jordan? Is it Lebanon? Is it Norway? Is it Sweden? Is it Greenland? So, in fact, the Palestinian people, with their heroism and their sacrifice, they are fighting a struggle for all of us against this new wave of brutal, sadistic colonialism, which we have seen again now against Lebanon and against Iran. We have to stand up because we have to take our part in history and take our responsibility seriously. We cannot continue to be intellectually lazy and leave it to others to fight the struggle for decent lives, for decent conditions for all people on earth. We are in a very dark time. The light, to me, comes from Palestine, from Gaza, from the West Bank, and from Lebanon. And my most important weapon is medical solidarity. And my most important activity is the good solidarity between people in the UK, in Norway, in all over the world, who massively support the Palestinian struggle. We are the majority. We just don't know it, and we are not that well organized. But we will succeed, and the European leaders today, like the Spanish Prime Minister, also the Norwegian leadership, who are moving towards more active support, they do it because they're pushed by the solidarity movement. So we have to keep up. You have to keep up your work. Or if you're just lazy in your couch and zapping on the TV, drop that, go to the streets, organize, and fight for the right of the Palestinian people. You're all needed.
Mads Gilbert, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Do drop your comments below, subscribe here on YouTube not to miss a thing, and join our Patreon for bonus content and to support our work. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok. All the links are in our bio. Until next time, stay awake, and we'll be back soon with more tea.
Thanks for tuning into The Tea. If this conversation resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. We love to hear from you. And remember to share our content with someone you think should hear it. And why not listen to these other episodes we think you'll love? Let's keep the conversation flowing.